Hi,
Hi.
how are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you. How are you?
Doing great. Lee Ellen should pop in here in a second, but it's what, 6 p.m. your time right now?
Nearly, yes.
Nearly six. Yes, it's noon for us here. So, yeah, let me just make sure everything is on properly.
Thank you for doing it an earlier time. I know it's not inconvenient, sorry.
Oh,
Or not
not
as
at
convenient.
all. We enjoy it. It's really cool that we get to interview tons of authors from over in England. Last month we hosted Heba Al-Wasiti, who's also based in the UK. So
Okay.
for her book Weaving Shaw, which is a debut. So that was really, really fun. And sometimes it's nice. It's a perfect lunch break moment. And
I've
we
not
always,
been. Sorry, go on.
oh, I was like, we always record these. So a lot of our people that can't make it live will watch it back in the evening, which is so fun.
I've not been to Waco in many, many years. But
Yeah, you were born in Texas, weren't you?
yeah, uh, I was born in Denton, but I don't think we really lived there that long. We moved kind of every 2 years. So I think like Denton and Grayford, like a little bit down near San Antonio. Then we moved to Hong Kong for a year and then moved back to Nevada, which is like kind of out, not the state, but Nevada, the town, which is very rural. And then we settled in Austin. I think that was the longest period of time for about 4 years. But I've been to Waco to see the Dr. Pepper Museum.
Yeah, that's our neighbor. Genuinely, we are right
Yeah.
across the street from there.
I think I used to have a friend that lived there, which is why. And then I think the relatives that have left in the States live out in Lubbock and Houston, respectively. So,
Yeah.
um,
The one thing about Texas is nothing is quite close together. So,
no, no,
it's quite the trek from Lubbock or Houston.
yes.
Oh, there's Lee Ellen. Hi.
Hi. Oh, connecting still.
All right.
Is my working?
There we go.
Oh,
How's it going?
fabulous. How are you?
Good.
Great.
Sunny, how are you?
I'm good. We were just talking about places in Texas.
Oh, that's fun. I want to know about all the places in Hong Kong. That's a big jump from Texas.
Yeah,
I am so excited to talk to you today. I'm going to totally geek out. So
thank
I
you.
will try not to embarrass you, but I've been a huge fan. I was so excited when you agreed to this chat because I loved the Book Eaters so much. So as soon as I saw you had a new novel coming out, I was like, I can't wait to read it. And then happened to have this
Oh, thank
fabulous
you.
job that allows me to talk to authors like you. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Kai, do we need to jump into our blurbs or do you need to do housekeeping first?
I think we are all good. If you want to just welcome and kick us off.
Welcome and kick us off. Okay, well, hi everybody. Welcome to our book club chat here today for The Girl with a Thousand Faces. I bumped my book. And today we're gonna Sunyi Dean and I know we do have people on that are following along, and so if you haven't read the book yet, you want to stop right now because spoilers will abound in this. Kai and I will be asking all kinds of detailed questions about all the twists and turns that came in this book. So back out, and Kai will send a replay when we finish. So you'll get that emailed directly. And we've prepped a bunch of questions, but I know that you might have some questions too. So you can just hop into the comment box or the Q&A panel and ask your question there, and we will follow up. And then stay to the end because then we'll announce our June pick. So, hi, what other housekeeping do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna do Sunyi's formal introduction, read that bio and do a brief overview of the book. So Sunyi Dean is a biracial fantasy author who was born in Texas, grew up in Hong Kong, and now resides in North England. She writes speculative fiction with a weird slant, and her debut novel, The Book Eaters, was a USA Today bestseller. Back in the day, her high school was a former mission house built on the edge of the original walled city, and her grandparents lived in Hong Kong through both world wars. In her spare time, she's buying whiskey, picking up dumbbells, and dying in jujitsu, which
You're
I
the
commend you
coolest.
for that. I took one jujitsu class ever, never again. I don't think I'm built to move like that. But today we are chatting about The Girl with a Thousand Faces, which follows Mercy Chan, a middle-aged ghost talker living in the infamous Kowloon Walled City in 1975. Mercy works for a local triad, helping settle disputes involving spirits. She has no memories of her life before World War II and has spent decades building a stable existence among Kowloon's criminals, ghosts, and outcasts. When a series of mysterious drownings begins plaguing the city, Mercy discovers that a powerful, shape-shifting ghost is stalking the waterways. The spirit seems to know secrets about Mercy's forgotten past and appears determined to destroy both Mercy and the city she loves. What begins as a supernatural investigation slowly becomes a reckoning with Mercy's own buried crimes. And we are so excited to hear directly from you about this book because we have loved it. So,
Thank
thank
you. That's really
you.
kind.
Okay, Sunyi, I want to start before we dive into the book because I we have a
Yeah.
million questions, but I just want to start with you because you yourself are just such a fascinating human. Um,
Thank
I
you.
I have a son on the spectrum, and so I'm always excited when I find neurodivergent authors and leaders that can just inspire us and encourage us. So, how has autism like inspired your writing and your life and your voice as an author?
I mean, I think I would firstly say it for our genre, there are a lot of autistic authors. I didn't really realize this until I started going to writer conventions, and it was like walking to like a Star Trek convention, almost like in the best way, like Adrian Tchaikovsky, R.J. Barker, Claire North. I mean, so many people. I think there are neurodivergent. I think maybe it's a career that really suits and rewards that kind of those kinds of traits because it's quite insular. It's not very social. It rewards hyper focus and obsession. You can just do this task for a long time. Uh, I think maybe some people find the publicity side of it a little challenging, but definitely on the writing side, I feel like we might actually outnumber uh, neurotypical people, at least at least in the cons that I've been to. I don't know about other genres. Maybe it's totally different. Maybe in romance, that's not the case, or crime or something. But just for sci-fi and fantasy, it it seems to be.
This book is a mashup of history, fantasy, gothic horror. What made you want to kind of blend those genres together? And did you have any books that kind of inspired you to do so?
I think. I mean, this book suffered from so many rewrites, so that was a factor. The fact that there were like different versions of the story that felt differently, and that the final version kind of took pieces from everything. But I suppose for this book, certain other medias like anime and manga were an influence. I don't know if you've engaged with a lot of those, but quite often they like to do that kind of twist. There's a really famous one called Madoka Magica, right, which starts out as like a magic schoolgirl kind of anime, and it gets very serious and basically changes genre. And they love to start with to surprise you in that way in that story, and I like that. Just as someone who consumes that media, I really enjoy it. I liked the idea of the story is not what it seems. It is a little bit of a risk because you do get people who are like, wait, where's like the murder mystery ghost talker stuff gone? Um, and the story does become something else. But I think as long as readers don't mind being surprised, it can be a fun experience, hopefully.
Yeah, you sent a note when I got my arc that said that it took you 5 years to write this book. So
Yeah.
I think about like my own life and how different I am now. 5 years, this human is different than 5 years ago human. Um, Not to mention as a writer, just your process may change. So like how did this book, I can't imagine like the book that we read must be so
Mm.
different than your original. design?
Oh,
So how did it change throughout?
so basically what happened is after Book Eaters kind of got through edits and my editor came to me and she said, so what are you thinking for the next book? And I said, oh, I have like all these other half finished projects that I could like focus on. And she said she would like me to try something completely new, not something old and partially abandoned. And we kind of sat and brainstormed. And I had never done a book like that where you just kind of create one from nothing. I'd always started like an idea I was interested in or an emotion. So all I started with is I knew I wanted to be in Hong Kong. And I had this concept of a woman is looking for someone, but the person she's looking for is herself, which is actually not too different from the final thing. But yeah, it did change a lot. There was at one point the protagonist was like a man called Eric, who now lives on as Erica. Um, and it was at one point the protagonist was like a 13-year-old girl. Obviously, there are kind of children in it for parts of it. And it was all over. I think at one point it was set in modern Hong Kong, and in the end, I kept coming back to setting what I wanted from it, which is Kowloon Walled City, which I think is really cool. It's influenced so much like cyberpunk and dystopia, and the modern perception of Hong Kong, I think, is really tied up with it. But also the rural side of Hong Kong, because I think a lot of people don't actually realize, it is that's how it portrays itself for like tourists. It's just this big city, but actually something like 70% of Hong Kong's land area is nature reserve. It has some really, really cool, beautiful places. Ghost islands are a real thing. They're islands that have been like abandoned by the communities, and they are full of really creepy ruins.
Wow.
So they are, yeah, they're all still. Um, I wanted, I guess, to see all the different sides of Hong Kong and its history, and that meant having this book that actually spanned quite a period of time because Kowloon Walled City didn't exist when the occupation was going on and all this stuff. So uh, I wanted too many things from the book, basically, and it kind of grew into what it is.
Wow. Readers who loved the Book Eaters may notice some like thematic
Mm.
similarities surrounding identity, family, even monstrosity. Did you see connections between the two books as you started this new project, or did that just kind of come because those are the stories you want to share?
I think I'm always interested in the idea that people aren't really very good and that we try to be, but we aren't. And for me in Book Eaters, Devon is not a good person. I think she tries, but by the end, like she's killed so many people. She's not really protected her son. She's not really achieved a lot of things she hoped to do. And she's paid a really terrible price for all of that failure along the way. And I think Mercy Chan, like, there's things about her that hopefully the readers will like, but also she has done terrible things and caused a lot of harm. And I think that side of people always interests me. I think we really struggle with it as people, like when you read on the news, oh, Mr. Smith from Bell Avenue is an axe murderer and he's been caught. And then they'll do like these interviews where everyone goes, oh, but he threw such good barbecues and he was so nice to kittens and he adopted orphans. And I think we do struggle with the idea that, people can be all of those things. And I'd written this just for another interview I have to do tomorrow, but the thousand faces is actually like a phrase in Chinese, and it refers to this cultural concept that people have basically many different facets, and we have many different multitudes in us.
Mm.
And I think I think Devon has some of those traits, and so does Mercy.
You're so good at that. You write really great, morally gray characters. You
Thank
know,
you.
and
Maybe I'm just very morally gray.
I feel like no.
Yeah.
Well, also I want to talk about Mercy because she's
Mm.
50. I'm 50. I'm so pleased to read a fantasy novel that has an older protagonist. So was that like the definitive choice when you wrote this, or did you make her older just because of the timeline jumps? Like, how did that play into the creative process?
I definitely wanted her to be older. I think people who've lived longer have like more varied life experience. Like sometimes you want the story about someone who's very young and discovering the world. But I think for me, I'm more interested in the other. There's plenty of fantasy books where everyone's 19, so they don't need any more from me. And I would have made Devon older, and I just couldn't make it work in the timeline. So she kind of squeaks by in 29. It was like the oldest I could possibly make her. Um, But yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know if I'm sure you read Where the Crawdads Sing, and it's like such a layered and interesting book. And I think part of why it's so layered and interesting is because the author was like 69 when she got published, and she brings so much life experience and the perspective that you can only have when you've lived those years. And I think, yeah, for me that's an interesting side.
I appreciated it. And it gave her that depth.
That's good
Yes,
to know.
I've been on a kick of finding books where the main character is not, ages 19 to 25. And I'm like, oh, yes, some life experience. Thank you. Um, the setting is just so incredibly cool. In fantasy, we often see a lot of Western European view. I know you have a significant connection to Hong Kong, having lived there and your grandparents and family being there. Were there any other aspects that inspired setting it in Hong Kong?
I think there's just the ghost itself, like the way it is a really good place because it has like the East meets West, where you have like the Christianity and some of the Western kind of beliefs that kind of feed into all the Eastern beliefs, and it's still very people are still very like superstitious. You still have like street wizards and things, in modern day. If someone dies in an apartment, you can't sell it, so you've had it like cleansed and things like that. So people, it is still part of daily life. And yeah, I like the rural side. When I was a teenager, the church I was with used to organize these trips out to the islands where you would just like rent a modern junk boat and spend all day kind of like island hopping and swimming, and um, that sensory side of it is like a very strong memory.
Yeah, and I felt like your setting almost becomes a character here because you've
Mm.
got the claustrophobia of this stacked city where all of these people have been stuck. And then, the second part of the story, we're on an island. I've lived on an island. I know how stuck you can feel on an island. So I feel like for me, as I was reading, the setting really kind of set that tone that blended well with a ghost story because you have just this kind of creepy, cozy element to it where you know. But I read a ton of historical fiction, and historical fiction is always, not always, but oftentimes a Western perspective, right? So you had me Googling and deep diving into this part of post World War II and the Japanese occupation in China. And um, how much of that did you yourself know? I mean, I know you grew up in Texas, but then you
Yeah.
moved to Hong Kong, or did you have to do a bunch of research? Like, I loved that part of this novel, learning so much about this part in history.
So I did do research, and also we learn that we learn that stuff in school because every culture kind of learns its own, I think, side of the war. So I think in the States, like it's very focused on what America did in World War II, and when they came in. In Britain, they basically, like in the UK, you basically learn about Britain, and you learn about what the British did in the war, and that's very focused on like Europe and North Africa. Um, but in China and Hong Kong, we did learn about the war, which started earlier for China, about 2 years early before Europe and 4 years before America. And it's very graphic. And you learn about stuff like the rape in Nanjing, which, like, I remember for this history class, the teacher just passed around this photo book for us to look at. And it was just like photo after photo after photo of people being like mutilated and corpses and all this stuff. And you just like, oh shit. And that was like part of our education as well. But then I think when I was reading, I was really struck by how much those events affected China. And I think a lot of the way China is now with its censorship and the cultural revolution, that kind of sense of self-hate. I think maybe some of that comes from the shame that they have because it's very different. Like in the UK, the war is remembered as being very heroic. You have Memorial Day where everyone wears like these poppies and you symbolize it and you honor the soldiers. And in Hong Kong and China, it's more like that is a really terrible period of history where it's very shameful and we were massively humiliated and lost like 20 million people. And it's just a very different like perspective on war, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Wow. So,
Sorry,
uh, no, it's
that was very
okay.
dark.
That's
No,
a
but that's why it's important to like write these
Yeah.
books and share these stories. Is I also find myself just like looking up different sites because I was like, this is not anything I've ever learned before.
Mm,
Um, but when, like, to gear a little bit into like the writing itself,
mm,
when you're balancing, the historical accuracy, the folklore and supernatural elements, and then also just the story you're trying to tell, what are maybe like some of the challenges you faced in that writing process to kind of keep details straight across the board?
I think not info dumping was probably
thank you.
it's yeah. I think like the early drafts there were just big sections where I just like written out history and that was just like to get it down and then you have to like make it into kind of a story. And I think I tried to keep the history the same as much as possible because people at the time like it's not everyone but a lot of people would believe still in ghosts and spirits and gods and so for them to talk about them in that way is not that unusual. It doesn't like jar things too much. But because I think the ghosts in the setting are really very much about the trauma of war, they didn't sort of affect that much. I think um, the history, where possible, I tried to keep. Obviously, there was no ghost regiment, I'm afraid, but there were guerrilla regiments in Saikang that were hiding out and doing things or trying to do things. And Hong Kong did fall very very fast to the Japanese. It's actually embarrassingly fast. Things like their guns are pointed the wrong way in the harbor, and it was like it's really bad when you read the history. You're just like, oh my god, this is terrible.
Be embarrassed for them, right? Um, um, One of the other things that really, well, I think the main thing that stands out to me about this novel is the writing structure. I read hundreds of books a year, and I don't think I've ever read a book that's structurally like this because usually it's, if it's dual timeline, you have the before and after, it's, you choose first person, you choose sometimes second person, but you put it all in there. You started off in third person and then switched to second person and then have a first person in there. I can't even imagine. My brain can hardly ask the question, let alone how you were able to write like that. So, I guess, first of all, tell us about that choice to be so bold to do that. And then, secondly, how did that work in your writing? I'm assuming you must be a plotter. How did you write like that? How did you switch in your brain to write like that?
So I think this is something that will like only writers would care about. I would probably say I would call the point of view omniscient first person in that for me it is always Guan Yin talking the whole way through, but that's not apparent. And I think the only clue is not really much of a clue, which is like the one sentence prologue where she tells you to sit down and listen, and everything is her talking to Su Yin all the way through. And I think when you have second person, there's always the question: who's the audience, and why are they being told this? Which was something I was thinking about when I was reading like N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy. Is like, why is she using this? Who is she speaking to? Um, and I'm not really a plotter, so well. I think for the first couple of books I wrote, which didn't get published, I sat down and just wrote them in kind of as I went and then would just rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And eventually I started doing my rewrites in bullet point. And eventually I found that I was just like writing everything in bullet points. So technically I moved from being pantser to plotter, but it feels like the same process. I do a lot of like sort of first, like the line between a first draft and a detailed outline is very, very blurry. And I think I do a lot in bullet point. I did get to a point where I just couldn't, I was so stuck with the book and I had no idea how to fix it. And I wrote this section in second person, and that's the start of Siyun section where she's on the boat with her mother, just leaning into trying to find the voice, trying to find the sensory aspects, and that um, when I wrote that, that's when I started to have a sense like, okay, who's talking and why and what it is, and that kind of fixed the novel and really salvaged it. So the answer is lots of rewrites. I think I've tried every kind of structure. I've tried one which went between like Mercy and Siu Yen. Uh, and that didn't work because it just slowed the pace down so much. Like Mercy's story progressed at like a snail's pace because you kept having to go back to the island and go back to and eventually settled on the one I have now, which is Mercy past and present, and then she dies, and then Siu Yen kind of past and present, and then they all catch up. And there were I tried so many ways and so many rewrites, and that's the one that was the least dysfunctional. So it just trial and error, I guess.
Well, it was brilliant because that writing style puts you it worked with changing the point of view then because
Yeah.
when you switch, sometimes that can be jarring, like and sometimes it is a bold decision when you get in the mind of one character as a reader and like fall in love with that character and then the story switches to another character and some people feel like pulled out of that story, but
Yeah.
I think the way that you did it and chose to also have the narrative voice change just made it so seamless. And then you're immersed in this next story of this mother-daughter story and the whole time you're like, how is this going to come together? And so it was one of those stories that just built. I felt like as I read, I just wanted more. So I touche, that's amazing.
It won't work for everyone, and that's okay. Like, not every book has to. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I think it's fine to take those risks. And it wouldn't be a first novel. I wouldn't have done it for a debut, but I think it's fine to take those risks. And especially in like the age of AI, that's maybe how you stand out because AI is always going to pick like the most predictable thing, if that makes sense. Like AI would never pick a structure like that because it would tell you that that's not smart or that's not done. And it, but I think I don't know, especially these days, like if you can take a risk, it is a good idea too in writing, because that's how we survive. Honestly, I really think that that is how we kind of keep ahead of the computer creep.
Absolutely. And I think because I do read so many books and I read in multiple genres, people are
Yeah,
always asking me for like, can you recommend a book? And so what I loved about this is a book that I can recommend to non-fantasy readers. You know,
yeah.
I can recommend to people who love historical fiction. I can recommend to people who love, generational stories. So it felt like literary fiction. It was just I loved it.
Thank
So
you.
it does because Kai and I read a lot of fantasy for this book club. Um, I think it really does stand out as just so uniquely told. So bravo.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And for me, I'm a mood reader. And so
Mm.
for me it's important pretty off bat within like the first chapter I know if I'm going to be really into a book depending on like the emotions that I feel connected to the characters and off jump I just knew that I was in for a bit of an emotional roller coaster. I don't know why. I appreciate it. I love that in a book. Because this novel contains both like moments of horror and then also beautiful tenderness. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to ask, like, how do you approach balancing emotional tones as you're telling your stories? And is that intentional? Are there certain like emotional pulse points you want the readers to feel?
Yeah, so this started with book eaters. I think I've talked about this in some other places, but it's kind of a weird concept. When I was writing book eaters, I kept thinking about like why do other genres make so much more money than us, right? That sounds really cynical, but like fantasy is actually it has a very dedicated readership, but it's got a very small slice of pie. And there's something in like thrillers and a lot of general fiction that is just like speaking to people. And I spent like a couple of years like while writing and doing other things, reading a lot more outside the genre, which is when I was reading like Crawdad Sing and Gone Girl and lots of domestic thrillers. And the thing that I came away with is that fantasy quite often tends to be a story about a hero, and it's how they progress and they see the world and what happens to them. But often, a lot of thrillers or general fiction are about the reader. So the example I love to use Crawdad Sing because I think it's a really iconic example of that. It's you see this woman like, oh, she's on trial, and then it goes back in time to show you her life. So it shows you, oh, she's guilty. Sorry, she's being accused of something. Is she guilty or not? And then you're shown her in a sympathetic light, and then you go back to the future and you see something that cast doubt on that. And so the reader's going in two different directions. Like on one hand, you keep seeing her sympathetically betrayed, and then you see her suspiciously betrayed. And I think by the time you get to the point in the novel where you find out whether she's guilty or not, you don't care because you have sided with her. And when you make the reader choose the character, it's like a very powerful emotional moment. And I think books like that, they're structured around like the reader's journey, how you experience the story. Because you could have written her novel in like one straight line, and it would be so boring. But because that author is like controlling when you find out this information, when you find out that information, you're trying to see her in different lights. um I think you go through a roller coaster that's kind of artificially constructed, if that makes, oh, I mean, that sounds bad, but it's constructed. The information is betrayed you in such a way that to maximize how you feel at all the times. And I tried to do that a bit with Book Eaters, where you see Devon like being horrible and then being a child, and how she gets to those 2 points and kind of undermining her constantly, but also building her up. And I don't think I ever quite got it to the point that I wanted to, but I felt like I got closer with this one, if that makes sense. That was really long, sorry.
No, that was perfect. Um, the thing about fantasy novels, right, is they always need to have this creature that you overcome,
Yeah.
whether it's a dragon or it's a phoenix but in this novel, what I found interesting is that you also are looking at like what creates the creature, right? Because in this book, it's so much about generational trauma and just that recycling of um, beliefs of, I was harmed and therefore I will harm. And so
Mm.
I just found it fascinating because it makes it hard to pinpoint the bad. As we talked about earlier, there's not who's the villain, because at this point now you're swapping out who the villain is and who isn't. So I guess let's just kind of dive into just the effects of trauma, because you have this um, these ghosts who haunt, but you also have this theme of like haunting yourself by not letting go. So just talk about that a little bit and how you infuse that into the novel.
So ghosts, I think they have a really interesting place in kind of Chinese mythology, because I think I mentioned this in the novel, they are often women, because they are people who've been wronged in life, and women are more commonly wronged than men, or at least they were in Chinese culture. And so they're stories about people regaining power when they've had power taken away, but they're also stories about people operating outside of social boundaries. So for example, in a certain period in Chinese history, if you're a lady and you get married and your husband dies, that's it. You don't get remarried again. You're a widow for life. But if you die and become a ghost, then all those social rules don't apply. So you get like these really weird ghost stories about like women who are dead and they get married again and they have children. And it's basically like, oh, you can tell a second chance romance as long as you're like a dead lady. So
Just
there's
like
something
that.
there's something about like being a ghost, which means that suddenly people who are disempowered can seek justice, they can complain, they can hunt men down, they can cut their intestines out, they can get married again, they can have power, um, and they can do all kinds of things which they're not supposed to do, they're not allowed to do culturally. And that side of it is really interesting to me. But also, yes, that the ghosts don't move on until all their issues are resolved. And I think it's a very thinly veiled metaphor, isn't it, for war and the impacts that has.
Right.
Um, and there's a lot of discussion about how like the boomer generation is often impacted. Their parents went through war and that's impacted them, and that impacts the next generation and so on. I think you do see a lot of that in China. I think you see a lot of like people my age going no contact, breaking free from parents because they have all these kind of maladaptive toxic habits that they learn from their parents who were damaged by war and so on. And it's this big huge mess. But um, that's very much where the ghosts are coming from. I think that they're all about those really tangled human relationships.
Mm.
Um, and just I guess I'm sorry, this is turning into very long again. I think I had this realization a few years ago that like human society is basically perpetually 20 years away from utopia. You know, all it would take is one generation perfectly raising the next generation, and you would have a really, really beautiful society. And that's also why we'll never have it, because every generation is damaged by the one before it, and you just keep carrying that forward and forward and forward,
Yeah.
which is a sad thing. But I think that that is just who and what we are.
And that's all assuming that we make good choices, which we don't.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there's always going to be greed and there's always going to be desire, and that always puts a wrench in things.
Yeah.
Yeah, also part of Mercy's journey in the book feels like it's tied to the idea that we can also become strangers to ourselves. And, the impacts that others have on us can lead us away from who we are as people. Do you think that identity for Mercy or just in general is determined more by memory, actions, or intentions?
Oh, all three, I guess. And we do like to tell ourselves a narrative. You know, everyone is a little bit of the hero. We are all the main character in our own lives, in our own universes. And I think there's something there as well for Mercy, where she has this story that she has told herself about her life, and that in that story, she has a place, and she is this specific person, and all of that unravels when she finally has to like meet someone else, where she's the villain in their story instead.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I'm reading Kai's questions. I'm like, oh, Kai, some of these are really good. I wrote questions and then Kai wrote questions and then we put them on the. I was like about to ask my question. I'm like, oh no, Kai, that's a really good question. Um, Sorry, I got sidetracked. One of the things I wanted to talk about also was I used to live in the Pacific Northwest and um
Like
love
near Guam.
lovely place. No, no,
Oh,
Seattle.
no, wait. Oh,
Seattle,
sorry.
Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest, Pacific.
So I heard Pacific and didn't hear the.
Um,
Okay.
and you there's certain cultural identities, right? And obviously post World War issues come up. And one of the things I loved about this book was just how you really kind of press into how you balance maintaining your cultural identity when you're in a new place. So, like in Seattle, right, it is
Mhm.
America, but there is definitely,
Yeah.
Asian inspiration and um, the ability to have maintained some culture. But I know that there is also loss of culture. So, um,
Mm.
just kind of talk about that balance. How do you maintain your cultural identity when you are displaced?
Like, for me specifically, or just in general, or
Sure, all the above.
yeah.
Because I mean, you went from Texas to Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that Chinese people definitely don't see me as Chinese. I don't speak Chinese anymore. I learned it as a child, but I've lived here 20 years. There's no one around here who speaks Cantonese. Uh, I don't look Chinese to Chinese people. When I go there, they're always surprised that I'm mixed. They're like, "Oh, right, we just thought you were like full guilo." Um, but and I think culturally, Hong Kong is like a really kind of weird culture anyway. Like modern Hong Kong people, at least when I was living there, they really look down on like the mainlanders, which is what they call like people from China. And there's this whole kind of they think that they're very like forward and future, like more futuristic, more modern, and yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that. And I think basically I don't really fit in anywhere very well. I don't have a Texas accent anymore. I don't speak Chinese. I look like not quite one thing or the other. So I think you just have to make your own kind of space for things, and um, accept that there are like, you're never going to be all of one picture, but you can be a little bit of everything.
I remember when we moved, so we lived in Seattle for like 20 years, then we moved to Colorado. And because I had lived so long in and around Asian culture, it didn't shock me, surprise me, right? Like you're just used to it. But in Colorado, they would have exchange students come and they would make the exchange students change their name to like
Mm.
an Americanized name. And I just remember thinking how horrible that is because you're stripping someone of their actual like identity that is so much a part of them. But um, I can see how if you are living between cultures, how that would be hard to fit in either, really.
Yeah, I did actually use my middle name for a long time because I was very embarrassed by it. And then as I got older, I moved away from that. So I had before I got married, I had a really long name, which was Sunny Robin Melian Bertie Harlequin McBrayer. That I know is horrible. And then I shortened that to Sunny Robin Dean, but I used Robin for a long, long time. But I'm not that keen on Robin, really. I mean, for me, I always associate it with Robin Hood, who's like a guy. But,
Right. Steal stuff.
um, so I think in my late teens, I just went back to Sunny and was like, this is fine.
But I think you grow into your identity, right? And so now you are
Yeah.
more confident in who you are and you're going to carry that.
Yeah. And when I was younger, my American grandmother wouldn't use my Chinese name. So I think when I was a kid, I thought, oh, that must be because there's something wrong with it. And as I got older, I was like, no, hang on, there's just something wrong with her. it's,
I mean, it goes
it,
back to
yeah,
her issues playing into
yeah.
your, oh, that's fascinating. That in itself is fascinating, right? Because she was learning that kind of cultural appropriation too. Wow, and pushing it down on you. That's
Oh,
fascinating.
no, sorry, that was my American grandmother. She wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah.
No, my Chinese grandmother would use my name in Mandarin, which is like different from Cantonese. So,
That's wild. But all of this comes up in the book, which I just think is it's
yeah.
so well done because it does make you think about these things. Why people are the
Well,
way
thank
they
you.
are, why how these generational issues continue to grow instead of, like you said, why can't we live in that utopia where we learn from our mistakes and move forward instead of perpetuating more?
Yeah, it still impacts a lot of Chinese Japanese relationships today, I think, and that I think people in the West don't always quite understand, and people in Japan don't understand because they don't really learn their own history. Um, so there are a lot of Japanese people who are just like confused, like why do so many other types of Asians hate us? Like because they're still mad about the war. You haven't apologized, and it's a whole political thing there.
Maybe that can be your next book.
Oh no, that one's written. Sorry.
Oh,
Jumping back into this book a
Yeah,
little
sorry.
bit. Oh no, I love it. I want to talk about the characters.
Yeah.
Just like let's talk about we've got Mercy, who's, works as a ghost talker for a gang. We have Su Yin, who's a rebellious child and escapes to an island. Did your feelings about Mercy or Su Yin change as you worked throughout the story? And because, it went through so many different versions of the story, which character would you say changed the most from like first draft to 5 years later or final novel, what we read?
Oh, I think they all change beyond recognition. I think because at one point, like Mercy and Cian were the same character, and then I was kind of like, no, that's too simple a twist. We can't do that. And that's the point where they became two separate people, and then I had to like develop them separately. Uh, I guess probably Mercy changed the most because she actually changed like age and gender at least twice. So, and, and yeah, um, she was definitely shuffling around a lot.
I did the audio of this and I thought it was phenomenal. Do you have any say in like who reads your books?
You do, yeah. I mean, it varies book by book and author and like publisher by publisher and basically how nice or not nice a publisher is. I think so for Book Eaters last time the UK publisher did it just because it was easier for them to find like someone with a British accent, and I thought they did a good job. I asked them for like someone with a northern accent, not like a posh BBC one.
Mhm.
And they went out their way to do that. This time around, we discussed it, and I was kind of like, is Natalie Nardis available because she's like an icon? And I do think her voice is amazing, and yeah, they asked her to audition, and she was free, and like I listened to it blind, to the samples blind, and right away I was like, I can tell which one she is, but just because to me her voice was so like, just her acting quality is just top notch, basically.
And that's what it felt like. It was like acting quality because she does. She gives names and locations that she just does. And then obviously all the multiple characters' voices. So
Mm. And there's a lot of women. There's very few men in the book, so she had a lot of work to do with all the different women.
but she did a great job. So that's why I was so curious if you like specifically got to pick her. So that's fascinating that
Yeah.
you wanted her and then you could pick her out of the different options.
Yeah, they quite often will send you like they usually will go and find like three or four people and then ask you to listen. And usually, they will listen to you. If they have really strong feelings or if that person's not available, then it might not be the case. But
Mm,
generally you get a good degree of input, I think.
that's so cool. I love audiobooks. I'm a huge fan. So I appreciate
Mm.
it because I also feel like audiobook narrators can make or break a book. And so with a book that was as special as this, I was a little nervous. But because I read the arc early, but then whenever we prepare for these interviews, I always like do an audiobook listen to
Okay.
each. And I was like, oh, this was really good.
Yeah, I've been listening to audiobooks more because I do quite a lot of driving and I have a lot of books to get through for like blurbs and early reads and stuff. And it's just a way of like using time that I would otherwise waste listening to like depressing political podcasts. So I get through a lot more books now, which is helpful, really helpful.
This is way better than depressing political thoughts.
Yeah.
Definitely. I loved the ghost cat. Bow.
Yeah.
It was so fun. What made you want to include him? And if you could have a ghost cat, would you?
Probably not because mostly they're demons and they're considered quite dangerous. But I just thought it would be fun to like. I always think it'd be fun to have like an animal companion, and then you like have to actually put them in, and you write 5 chapters and realize they haven't done anything, and you have to go back and edit it, and it's so annoying. But I thought it'd be fun. I thought they were such a cool little piece of lore because they are a thing. I think their lore is quite tragic because they were considered not very nice usually. So you would have things like people like kill dogs in the hopes that the dog ghost would keep the Malgui away,
Mhm.
which is a bit grim. Um, and I remember asking my mother like what the rules were on these different creatures, and she's like, "There aren't any rules. Like it's very fluid." And then she was like, "It's just fantasy. Can't you just like make it up?" And then I was trying to explain to her that if you can, but if you make it up in the wrong way, people on the internet will be mad at you, and she didn't really understand.
Mm.
So yeah, I thought it would be fun, and I did play very fast and loose with that myth, but not as fast and loose as the Gremlins. If you
Mhm.
remember, those are called Mogwai, and that is the same word. I don't know why they picked that word. They don't look like cats. They
No,
hate water, I guess.
right. That's interesting.
That's so funny. Were there any other like creatures, legends, or supernatural concepts that maybe you wanted to include and ultimately left out?
Yeah, so there's a bit where Suyun's mother tells her a ghost story, and
Mhm.
originally I had her tell the story of the painted skin demon, but then I changed it to be she tells the story of the island because that makes a lot more sense, and it saved me a lot of time and flashbacks. But the painted skin demon is a story about this man who's coming home from, I think he's called Wang, and he comes home from work and he sees this girl crying in the streets, and she tells him that she was like a concubine or a servant in another house, but she used to get beaten by the first wife, so she's run away. And he feels sorry for her, and she's very pretty, so he brings her into his house. He's already married, and he and his wife let her stay there, and that's fine until one day he looks in on the room. I think he's like probably hoping to see her changing or something, but instead he sees a monstrous green creature laying out human skin on the bed, and it's topping up the paint. It's repainting the figures, and when it's done, it puts it on and it looks like the girl. And he basically has a massive freak out and he runs to this priest, and the priest is like, well, it's not really harming you, so what's the issue? But he's still upset, so the priest gives him like a charm to ward the ghost off, and it doesn't work. All it does is make it really angry, so it rips his heart out. And there's like no structure to the story, and then the rest of the story is about how like the priest has to come and get rid of the demon, and then the wife goes to a necromancer and gets her husband brought back from the dead, and it's like a really funny story, and it's kind of grim but also hilarious, and it just didn't make it in anywhere.
I
So
feel like this needs to be a book now. You
yeah.
just pitched us a book and we're like, yes, we would read that book, Sunyi. Or short story, maybe children's bedtime story.
Yeah, it's in a collection of books called Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, which is like a collection of historical ghost tales. And you can kind of like buy it, I think.
What did you
But it's
tell us
uh,
from what?
Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, I think, something like that. But
Love it.
it's really weird because actually ghost stories run afoul of Chinese censorship, so it's really hard to get modern ghost stories now.
Even though most of them are based on some sort of cultural mythology, right?
Well, so the Strange Tales from Chinese Studios, those are all old stories, but the modern CCP is, at least on paper, a secular organization, and they don't believe in promoting superstition. And I think for something like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, they can kind of be like, right, we know there aren't elves and wizards running around. That's not part of their cultural consciousness. But in a place where people still believe in deities and ghosts and spirits and ancestors and stuff, that is like promoting those things. So it is really difficult to get translations that have that content there. I think they can sell like an English version of my book if someone ordered it, for example, but they wouldn't be able to translate it and sell it. It would definitely hit the censorship laws.
That is fascinating, right? Because in Western culture, ghost is like ghost story. It doesn't,
Yeah,
you're not like literally thinking like, oh, there's this spirit entity here. But,
yeah.
you know, like, no, that is like really,
You get some that work around it where they basically you get to the end of like the film or book and they're like, and then it was all a dream and everyone woke up because but it's yeah, it's really tricky.
oh,
If you get a Chinese translation, it tends to be in Taiwan rather than China.
wait. Oh, interesting. Okay. Um, we are chatting so much. I don't
Yeah,
want to.
sorry.
No, this is fabulous. I love how the brain works and hearing all about this, but I do want to get
Yeah,
to the point where we talk about mercy and what
yeah.
happens in this book because
Okay,
I did not see ahead of time that Mercy was the person who kills Su Yin, right?
that's
So
good. The twist worked.
yeah, like we warned ahead of time, people watching, we were gonna dive in. So you said you're not a plotter though. So how did you write you had to have known that part when you started. How did you hide that from us? It literally I texted Kai in we like in our group thing and was like it made me want to start over and read it again when I got to that part because I was like, how did I miss this? What just happened?
Yeah, on that part too, I just kind of put in brackets, I was like, jaw on the floor. Like I was not prepared.
What is life right now?
I'm not a plotter, but I am a heavy reviser. And there's this quote from Gene Wolfe where he says, "After I've rewritten something 10 times, I have a working first draft," and that's like the kind of camp that I'm in. So I started with the twist. I knew I sometimes try and write drafts without twists, and then I realize that that's just not me. So I like reading twists. I like writing them. I started with that twist and then kind of worked backwards and just through revision and just through rewrites, built around it. And I think even though I didn't like plot it out from beginning to end, starting from the point of this is what I want the book to hinge on, everything kind of follows out from that, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%, because it did. I was like, I need to read
Yeah.
this again with that perspective in mind now. But that is part of why you were so brilliant about the writing structure. Again, it goes back to the
I think
writing.
because the reader is expecting, because a common twist, I guess, would be that Mercy is the girl on the island, and I think everything in the book is set up to point you to think that you've seen that, and that's kind of maybe how it's lulling you into a false sense of security. I don't know.
Right. Percent. And then I was like, what just happened? Oh,
Yeah.
so
And
good.
then also finding out that Su Yin, once Mercy's,
I love it.
she's the one who's ghost hunting her in 1975. It's just it's brilliant. Um, but one thing I really loved in the theme and the ending is that, like, it was surprisingly compassionate for such a dark novel. And I feel like really spoken to the theme of like forgiveness,
Mhm.
um, and like exploring what forgiveness can look like without excusing the harm that was
Yeah.
done. Can you just tell us a little bit about why you wanted that to be the conclusion?
Hmm.
So I think there will definitely be some people who are a little bit sad that there's not like a big epic combat showdown, and I totally get that. But I think I remember attending a panel a few years ago where they talked about the difference between like kind of Western and Asian ghost stories, and they were talking about the difference in the Japanese and American ring, and how the focus in the Japanese ring is just like fixing the problem, and in the American ring they go to all these links to show you that, oh, these people are innocent, they didn't deserve this to happen, and that means that the ghost is really evil. And that but actually, the focus in Asia is like ghosts are a community problem, they're a symptom of something that's happened that we all need to address, and it's not about defeating, it's about understanding that that there's a real grievance underneath all the ghosts existing. And right at the start, Mercy says she's not an exorcist, she's a ghost talker. Her first encounter with the ghost is not to banish it, but to say, yes, you should go and get your justice. And I think that for her to be true to her character, she would get to the end and be like, actually, you need to go and get your justice, even if that comes at her expense. And I don't think there could be any kind of happy ending where she gets to just live in someone else's body, because that's not right either. Um, I don't know. I think I was very stuck on the ending for a long time before I kind of gave myself permission to have like a talky ending,
Mm.
because I think that actually kind of fit with Mercy in a lot of ways. That's like what she was doing and what she's good at, and that I think Suyun's pain is really not. It's not just about like being killed, although that's part of it, but it's the fact that like she's been completely forgotten and no one has ever addressed it.
Mhm.
Um, and when you read like enemies to lovers books, I totally get that vibe, because there's something so intimate when you have a nemesis and you know each other really well and you're like emotionally invested in this person that you hate. But it is actually really painful when the person that you hate doesn't know that you breathe. And that is a very like unique kind of pain. Like um that person is the focus of your universe and they're just like, who are you? And so I think that for her is the source of just Mercy not recognizing her, and that actually, yeah, a chat was like a big help for her in that way. Um, and
Yeah.
I think you can't, if a book is about breaking the cycle, you can't end it with continuing the cycle by them just whacking each other. So,
Right. You had to. I mean, it's like it felt like an Aesop fable in a way, where it's like the moral
mm,
of the story is, your grief will turn into vengeance and
yeah.
despair and be a spiral. Like, don't do that, right? So they
And
had had to
the
bring.
goddess Guan Yin, she apparent in mythology, she apparently has made this commitment where she's going to help every person, like basically end like in their karmic cycle and stop like to do what she's doing with them. And that supposedly is something that she's committed to do, which sounds like a massive job. So good luck to her.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't realize that was like a real person.
The
Mhm.
goddess
Yeah.
is, yeah. So it was they were originally a Hindu god that has become like a kind of female Buddhist god as the religion changes. So my mother explained to me that like she's like the most conservative person ever, right? She's like, oh, Kuan Yin is like the god that we call them a she, but they were born a he.
Right. A they.
Um,
Yeah.
they, yeah, and I think partly that's because this deity used to reincarnate in different bodies to understand people better and to have compassion for them, and that meant that they were actually kind of pretty gender fluid anyway, and they were like sometimes male, sometimes female, not a big deal.
Wow. And that whole, I just love that whole concept of choosing compassion over
Yeah.
vengeance. So I didn't realize that was an actual deity. Hmm.
Yeah, I was trying to be very careful of that because people do still worship. I think Guan Yin's probably the most worshipped
Hmm.
still in that part of the world.
Hmm. I loved it.
Incredible. We only have a couple more minutes, so I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What are some books that maybe you've read recently that
Mm.
you are excited about or would recommend?
I guess in the context of like kind of Hong Kong mythology, there's probably two I'd recommend. So there's one coming out in July called Harbor of Hungry Ghosts by Eliza Chan. And she's a Chinese Glaswegian writer, so her accent is amazing. And her book is also set in Hong Kong, but kind of like the 1890s. I think it's the end of the 19th century, and it's like colonial era. So she goes much more into like the magic and the mythology than I do. But she also brings in like because the British colonialism is coming in, and the Brits bring with them their fairies. So it's like English fairies meet Chinese ghosts and what happens there. And then there's also like a like a kind of thriller-esque plot, and the main character is like a little bit like an assassin warrior female type lady. So it's very fun, and it's I think if you enjoy that side of it, she really kind of digs in. But on the flip side, if you're not a fantasy reader, you're maybe more grounded. There's another book that came out recently called When Sleeping Women Wake by Emma Payen, and that is set in Hong Kong during the Japanese occupation, but it's purely historical, and it's just about these three ladies trying to survive in not very nice circumstances, and they're kind of interweaving stories. So those are two I think are fun.
Yeah, great choices.
Yeah.
Okay, you are from Texas.
Yeah.
To Hong Kong and have written about Hong Kong. Will you have a book written in Texas?
Yes, that is like an hour before I was talking to you. I was actually on a call with my editors because I'd had the edit letter. So I finished a book, handed it in March, and got edits back. And we were talking about it, and it is a near future sci-fi set in rural Texas.
Is this written just for me? Oh my goodness! No way.
We're still arguing about the title because they hate my title. Well, they don't hate it, but they're like it doesn't fit the book. But basically, it's kind of like set in 2050, and it's about a world where there is a pathogen, a pandemic which is hit, and the sickness makes people feel like they're experiencing religious enlightenment. So they don't think that they're sick; they think that they're transcending to another universe. And that means that they want to be ill and they don't want a cure. On the flip side, there is a cure manufactured by a single company, and you have to be on this drug for the rest of your life or you'll die. And it gives you crippling depression. So you can choose between the disease that kills you but makes you feel euphoric, or you can choose between the the debt inflicting drug that gives you depression. And the main character is the man who is responsible for both the pathogen outbreak and the creation of this disease. And it's about what he does to try and fix it and how you live with that guilt. And it's like I pitched it to my editors as kind of like Station 11 meets Scanner Darkly, and it's probably a little bit more like Normal People meets Fallout, but we'll see.
Oh, it's incredible. I'm so excited already. Are you going to make us wait 5 years again?
No. I think it was just, yeah, there were lots of things going on behind the scene of that book as well. Like I had editors leaving and quitting jobs, and there was like, yeah, stuff on the industry side. This one was like, it's finished. In fact, we were talking about dates today, and I think we're aiming for fall 2027 now. So
Wow.
hopefully it'll be out not too long.
Happily beta read for you.
Thank you.
Incredible. Oh, you're making me so happy. A sci-fi set in Texas is like made for Llewellyn.
A little bit in Nevada as well, although I've not been to Nevada, but yeah. It will feature Grayford, the first town I remember living in.
Oh, really? How
Yeah.
fun. I think that's so fun. Do you think you'd ever write just like a historical fiction? Or
I think
you always
I
have
think
that?
that's hardcore historical fiction because you can't just be like, and then magic solved my problems. You have to be like, oh, people actually did this, and you have to be accurate. I think it takes like years and years for historical, doesn't it? And a lot of times, crime maybe. I would love to write crime. I don't know about historical.
Crime would be fun too.
Crime would be fun. I love crime fiction.
Okay, what's the last crime fiction novel that you loved? Put me on the spot.
Oh, I don't know if this counts as crime, but like All the Colors in the Dark.
Oh, really?
Oh, I love Chris Whitaker. He is just a delight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fantastic
maybe the last one was actually a crime fantasy. It was Voyage of the Damned. It's like a locked room fantasy murder mystery, 12 chosen ones on a boat, and like they all keep dying and stuff. And that's quite fun as well.
I love crossovers. I mean,
Yeah.
I love it when it hits all the things.
So fun.
Yeah, or Stuart Turton, the one that was another again crossover. The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, 7.5 deaths. I remember it's 7.5 because there's like the seven husbands of
Yeah.
Evelyn Hugo, and then the 7.5 deaths of Evelyn
Yeah.
Hardcastle.
So in one country it's 7.5, and in one country it's 7, and I can never remember which. So
Oh,
I don't know why, but it's got like a slightly different title, which drives me crazy in like the UK versus the US. So maybe because of Evelyn Hugo.
yeah, probably. I was like, well, it's so funny because though they are very different books,
That's really different.
and people come in looking for one and grab the other. I'm like, that is not the one you want.
No.
Very
Like,
different book. Oh my gosh, Sunyi, thank you so much for your time. This has been spectacular. I love learning more about your writing process and how your brain works.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a huge privilege.
Can't wait for your next one. We will
Um,
we'll chat again. This was great.
I don't get out to the States very often, but I'm theoretically supposed to be in Washington in August, so for the National Book Fest, apparently. So we'll see if that happens.
Okay, well, if you decide to make a Texas trip, no. We're
you can
welcome.
come back to the Dr. Pepper Museum again.
Yeah. I've been there like twice as well. It's such a weird place.
They have a
Yes, well,
statue, so
yeah, they just installed a what is it, a 50-foot like bottle of Dr. Pepper in the front
Wow.
yard. It's crazy for their like
yeah.
100th anniversary. I don't know. They're always doing stuff. They are literally our neighbor, and so it's just kind of
Wow.
fun to see what's going on over there all the time.
Thank you so much for your time, Sunyi.
Oh, thank you too. Yeah. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
All right.
Okay, Kai, do we want to announce what's next?
Absolutely. I yet again don't have a physical copy with me because I'm listening to it on audiobook, but I'm going to drop into the chat real quick. We are next meeting on July 1st, at 7 p.m. with Julia Alexandra reading Midnight on the Celestial. Um, so
Amazing.
excited about this one. This is a YA fantasy, and so leaning back down a little bit, but it is set on a
Ship.
a ship, and it is also a little bit like darker horror themes to it. Perfect for a spooky summer read. Who doesn't need that? It's like your dark cruise ship moment. If you've recently read a fun beach reads cruise ship, here's your dark fantasy version. So it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it will be great.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
was just Googling that.
Thank
Yes, and she's based out of Florida, which is super fun. But when we reached out, she was saying how several of her mutual friends have like been to Fabled, and so we're super excited to chat with her, even though she can't be here in person. It's gonna be a good one. Leellen, do you have any comments about the book?
Well, I just think it's really fun. I mean, I love a kind of when you're stuck somewhere, so the cruise ship concept is a fun one when you're stuck. So I think people will like it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us live today. We will send out this recording 24 hours from now. Thank you again, Sunyi, for joining us all the way from over across the pond. Hope you have a great rest of your evening. And we will see you guys next month.
Yay, bye.
Yeah, no worries. Bye.